A letter from Matthew Tallarico, editor, Homespun Publishing, to Mr. Stanley Nolan, prospective author. Dear Mr. Nolan, we here at Homespun Publishing are very interested in your book, Former Homes of the Quabbin, a historical guide to hiking the cellar holes of the Quabbin towns. It is a thoroughly interesting and well-researched book, which we think will serve as an invaluable resource to history buffs and outdoor enthusiasts alike. I was personally intrigued by the entry regarding the former home of Mr. H. Tallarico, who was my great-great-grandfather. I'm looking forward to seeking his home and seeing the cellar hole of his former livery just off of Dana Town Center. However, I am writing to you regarding a handful of entries which appear to stray from the nature of the book as historical hiking guide into what seem like flights of occult fancy. For example, in an entry regarding the home of Ms. L. Frieden on page 87 in the chapter on Gate 37, you write, once a humble cottage with simple wooden shingles and an outhouse in the back, the residence of Ms. L. Frieden was a model of simplicity, a rustic pre-Revolution era home which withstood the test of time, right up until its owner disappeared, leaving the home abandoned when the state assessors came to claim the land. No money was remitted for the abandoned property. When viewed through the umbral plane, the cellar hole reveals a Tellurian rune which fairly hums with exertion against the eldritch power it attempts to restrain. Here at Homespun, we have published a number of local authors who have written wonderful and compelling fantasy novels, and would certainly be interested in reading any works of fiction you are interested in publishing. However, in the context of this particular guide, we feel that audiences would find this darkly whimsical tone confusing. Other entries of concern are the reference to the thinning veil to the Fey realms in the entry about the Dana Town store on page 157, the mention of ritual sacrifices invoked to restrain the horror in the abattoir of the Goodwin Farm on page 203, the reference to the Enfield Lodge as the location of a Black Mass, which was held to secure an alliance with the kindred to hold back the Ancient One, on page 246, and of course the bizarre admonition against insulting those spirits and crawling things which lurk at the verge of the green wood in the appendix on 290. The rest of the book is perfect, and we would love to move forward with publishing. These changes are amenable to you. Please submit a revised draft so we can begin discussing payment. Best regards, M. Tallarico, Ed, Homespun Publishing.
In the decades and centuries since its great tragedy, the city of Salem, Massachusetts has become a sanctuary for the strange, the unusual, and yes, the supernatural. Werewolves, vampires, fairies, mages, and other more esoteric things now walk the streets in relative safety. And when the mortal population gets too curious, they do what any community would do. They form a committee. Welcome to The Chimera, a role-playing adventure podcast. Our campaign this season is called Gallows Hill, and it takes place in our version of the World of Darkness, the setting that encompasses Vampire the Masquerade and all its sibling products. I'm Vin LeBate, and I play 8-Ball, a vampire with mental health issues and an assortment of fake IDs, and joining me this season are...
I'm Braden Lamb, and I play Mew, a mummy cat who's into urban planning and sacred geometry.
I'm Jeffrey Bard, and I play Jack Foxglove, a werewolf shaman who coaches the Salem High School football team, the Salem High Witches.
I'm Ethan Bremner, and I play Mother McCree, an immortal Irish witch and American Civil War veteran.
I'm Kacey Smith, and I play Truly Reynard, an animalistic fairy running from her past, sometimes literally.
And I'm Kelly Weissman Asbruce Jackson, the storyteller.
Now, let's get started.
All right, everyone. Where we left off was that Mother McCree had returned from her diplomatic mission to Springfield and had confirmed that it is now under the control of the Couriers of Cardley. And parenthetical here, the person that he has delegated local authority to in Springfield is both a vampire and a werewolf, which, as we established, is something of a no-no for both vampires and werewolves. The Sanitation Commission, in its capacity as collective acting mayor of Salem, has a number of different matters to attend to, diplomatic relationships to discuss with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe six more of those. No, I'm sorry, 5 of them. And there's also there's a couple of different local meetings that have to take place before the big thrice annual meeting of all the citizens of Salem. So let's see if I can get this right. There is a meeting of the College of Legates. The legates are the individual people who have responsibility for each of the 5 sort of subsections of Greater Salem. There's a meeting of the Conference of Wardens. The Wardens are each people who oversee the various nexi, the spiritually important locations in and around Salem. Mew is a warden, for instance. And also of note, there is a monthly moot, gathering of all the Aratha who are members of the Standing Stone Society, which is most of the Aratha in Greater Salem. And that is also happening in April before the meeting that happens on Beltane, the start of May. And that's also an opportunity to make some connections, and several of the people who are wardens and or legates attend that meeting because they are Aratha. So all of that is happening, and it's kind of up to the group what things you want to pay attention to and not, when you want to schedule things, how you want to divvy things up, if you want to do everything together all the time, or if you want to split responsibilities at all. It's really your game.
I feel like we want to do the reaching out to other neighboring communities together, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think that's a place where we're going to need people who can cover multiple bases.
And also where things get maybe a little bit more dangerous.
Yep. And I think I'm leaning towards doing those first because we're going to need to shore up some alliances and fronts. That's my initial thought.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds fine with me. Everybody.
Yeah. There were. These go individually, right? Because we did we met with the Crimson Robe Society individually.
Yep.
Which was just the mages of Greater Boston.
Yeah. It might or might not, your call, be useful to refer to that geopolitical map that I gave you a little while ago. I can bring it up for you if people don't have it handy. So, Greater Salem has existing diplomatic relationships with basically everybody who abuts Salem and a couple of other important groups that are nearby. So, starting counterclockwise from the northernmost point, right? Salem is this little golden section, the northeast end of Massachusetts, right? So starting from the top and proceeding counterclockwise, we have Guamic's Band, which is a large sept of Aratha. To the east of them is the Black Bear Brotherhood, another Aratha sept, and notably one that has just lost a substantial chunk of territory to Bacurius. The pink blob around Worcester is the Palatinate of Worms, which is dominated by Fae, specifically Fae who ride on dragons.
Oh, cool.
To the west of that blue section there around the 5 colleges area, it's the Guardianship of the Quabbin Horror. It's another mage-dominated grouping. The black section to the south of that is Bacurius's area. The blue section around Providence, Salem doesn't have any specific diplomatic relationship with right now, but that could change since they're not that far away and they do abut Bacurius. That is the Ochre Mask Concilium, another group of magi. And then south of all of that, encompassing the Cape and islands, southern Rhode Island, a chunk of southern coastal Connecticut, and about half of Long Island, is the Loyal Confraternity of Isles and Shores, which is yet another sept of Aratha. And Salem does have existing relationships with. So in terms of what's sort of on the checklist here, some sort of diplomatic conference with a representative from Guamac's band, the Black Bear Brotherhood, and the Loyal Confraternity of Isles and Shores, all of those being Aratha septs, and then meeting with diplomat from the Palatinate of Worms and the Guardianship of the Quabbin Horror.
Well, I'm liking this dragon idea because famously vampires dislike fire. Is that a thing that holds true from our experience?
I'm not sure how that exactly interrelates to fairy-based fire, but a dragon, I mean, it's a dragon. 8-Ball sort of pauses if this is an actual conversation. Like, okay, I don't know that it actually is a dragon. I'm really still not 100% on how the fairy stuff works.
Truly, what are your thoughts on those folk?
I mean, potentially very useful. I haven't been there myself, and so I don't, dragons are kind of like any type of animal. There's a pretty wide variation in the species and things, and so these could be, I ride a dragon that's the size of a horse and mostly moves me around but looks cool, or these could be, large, powerful creatures with the ability to decimate cities. I don't really know where they fall, but definitely might be worth looking into. That would be, my thought. I'm wondering if we should maybe just call everyone together at once instead of doing this one by one.
I was thinking we might get all the Aratha groups at once, because I feel like they'll have fairly similar perspectives, and two of them are neighbors. I feel like we might want to talk to the guardianship of the Quabbin Horror pretty quick, since A, they border Bacarius's territory, and B, they're the guardianship of the Quabbin Horror.
Is that something you know about?
Not a lot, but that combination of words is...
What is Idigam?
Idigam is...
powerful spirits?
Powerful spirits, but specifically spirits that exist from before the world came into being. So they reflect concepts or locations or something else that a spirit reflects that no longer exist. So think of them like essentially elder gods in a Lovecraftian sort of way, right? They're fundamentally anathema to the natural order of things.
And they were imprisoned in the 1920s?
Yeah, so Jack can probably give a little bit of background on this, but basically it's not super uncommon to find places in the regular world where Idigam have been buried in the ground or, imprisoned under the sea or something else like that. They're so powerful that they exist both in the Umbra and the regular world at the same time. And they're almost impossible to destroy. So usually your resort when one shows up is to lock them away somewhere. In this case, there's one underneath the Quabbin Reservoir.
Yeah, I feel like I put that pretty high on our priority list.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the horror is a good top tier target, and then the dragons also make a lot of sense. I mean, I look at the way that Bacarius is kind of pushing at the boundaries, and those are the two places he's going to push next, I'd say. So that's where we want to show her up.
Are either of them likely to be, how to say this, make allies with Bacarius? Like, are they so powerful that would be a silly proposition? Or are either of them a reasonable target for... Like, I think of like an elder god as not something you could communicate with necessarily or try to make treaties with. A dragon, maybe. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think it's probably predictable that based on the knowledge around the table, right? These 5 characters, what do they know about these things? If you're gonna choose, like, am I gonna try and cut a deal with a dragon? Am I gonna try and cut a deal with an elder god, you're going to choose the dragon. It's not necessarily a best choice scenario. I think, unless somebody feels strongly that their character would be different than this, I don't think that this group, without meeting with these folks, knows a ton about any of these organizations. I think Jack probably knows something about some of the Aratha groupings, but even that, I think he's really been focused on Salem pretty much his whole life.
Yeah.
Was the horror? Now I'm going to be Ethan the nerd. Was the horror imprisoned at the time of the establishment of the reservoir?
Yeah, essentially in this timeline, the reservoir was created in order to like stop any normies from stumbling upon the place where they imprison the Idigam in the earth.
Okay, then I would actually say that Mother McCree was against the nature of the imprisonment, because she was around during that time, and because she specifically was working to kind of defend the downtrodden at the time. Yeah.
And because Ethan is a big Central Massachusetts nerd.
And because I'm a big Central Massachusetts nerd who, was born and raised near the Quabbin. Yeah, I'm going to say that she did not agree with the ousting of the people living in the Quabbin Valley, and felt that this was a lazy solution to imprisoning the elder god. And so she's actually kind of not popular with the guardianship.
For the listeners at
Wouldn't
home,
surprise me at all. The listeners at home, including Joe Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Quabbin Reservoir was created on top of several existing towns, which were cleared out, and then I believe most of the structures are still down there.
No, that isn't accurate.
No,
the structures are all gone. If you see the pictures of the Quabbin, it is a giant hole where they filled in with water. No, the structures are all gone. But the important salient political details were that many of the people, it was during the Depression, so the properties were very severely devalued, and so a lot of people were pressured out because they couldn't afford to fight not doing it. And so for purposes of the game, Mother McCree has a history of fighting social issues from the low-income perspective. And so she would have fought this specifically because it was in her own backyard. And so you're kind of implying, Kelly, that the guardianship was kind of working with the state or used the state's decision as kind of a cloud cover for locking away the can I say elder god? I mean, Idigam is fine, but
it's a fine.
Okay,
it's one of the elder spirits or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's no wrong thing to call it because it literally doesn't have a pronounceable name.
What kind of mages are we talking about? The hodgepodge or?
Mother McCree would know this. It's a more modern leaning cabal, right? Like
because it encompasses like Amherst and Northampton and stuff like that, right?
Right. Most of the areas where magi are the dominant sort of veiled political force, they are centered on one or more research universities. That's just a really good place for magi to hide out and extend their power base from. So you don't always find them in power where there is a major research university, but it's unusual to find them in power where there isn't one. So it's basically it's a cabal of magi who are centered on the 5 colleges, but have like extended their influence out into the center of the state, specifically taking responsibility for this thing that's imprisoned below the reservoir.
Yep.
So 8-Ball taps her laptop. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to schedule meetings with the following priority. We'll see if the scheduling works out. Guardianship, Dragons, Aratha, Okermass Concilium, and Providence. And I'm going to see if I can get a hold of folks from around the Cerulean Circlet and the Alabaster Amphorian. God, what is with you people? Down towards New York, the Silver Chain, people in the other direction to shore up our issues.
So the Cerulean Circlet are the Magi who control most of southwestern Connecticut. They're centered on Yale. The Alabaster Amphorian control basically all of New York City except not Staten Island, and a chunk of the other chunk of Long Island and a little bit of Connecticut. They're centered at Columbia, and the Silver Chain is actually a sort of team up of a couple of different vampire princes that rule the entire stretch of the Erie Canal from Albany to Buffalo and almost the whole Hudson River all the way down to where the Alabaster Amphorian takes over control near New York City.
And I assume that that other group doesn't have Staten Island because that's where they're filming What We Do in the Shadows?
Actually, it's because it's in control of a demon.
So season 3.
There you go. Yeah.
So that is the plan as laid out.
I'm just going to assume that there's actually a map out that we're looking over because otherwise Truly's not going to know any of these things. But
yeah, for sure.
There's somewhere called the Celestial Sphinx Concilium, which is kind of hanging out around the area of the Silver Chain, and something called the White Snake Sisterhood, which looks like another group of Aratha. And there's some statue altars said to possess great wisdom and great destructive power. We could use both of those. Might also be another group to talk to.
Yeah, that's a group of Magi that are centered at Cornell.
Oh, okay, figures.
As appealing an ally as Celestial Sphinx does sound, I'm not that big on road trips. I'm a little bit tied to my tomb.
Oh, I don't think we want to leave town for any of this at this exact moment.
Yes.
But we because we are having essentially a diplomatic meeting coming up anyway, I feel like it behooves us to extend invitations to groups bordering Becurius's territory or near bordering Becurius's territory who we normally wouldn't invite. And I know there was a discussion that oftentimes they're invited, but they never show up. If there's any way we can prod them more without being openly hostile to...
I'll let them know that there are some red flags and that the situation is not as it usually is.
As a particularly if we're able to establish what we feel is a good relationship with any of these, I might suggest offering one of the talking sticks. There was a long time ago a group of branches of a tree made by a couple of fairies that allowed instant communication over great distances via magical means.
I think they're called cell phones now.
Oh, I've got one of those.
Mew swishes his tail.
Wait, Jack, do you mean you have a phone or a branch?
A cell phone.
Okay.
Well, yes, your family, I believe, was in possession of one of these sticks. I would be curious to track down how many of these are still extant and in whose possession they are.
I will put it on the to-do list.
All right, so you want to start with the guardianship, right?
Yes.
Okay. There are probably some people who, when you arrange a meeting with them, they are too weird to have like a totally normal conventional meeting. But this is one of the easier, more normal conventional meetings to arrange. So are you taking it in the mayor's office or somewhere else?
What about the meeting room?
No, I would actually do the alley because we're meeting with Faye. Everyone will kind of be able to see their true forms in Tuck Alley.
This is the mages first.
Oh, this is the
this is
mage.
the
Guardianship is the
Oh, sorry.
mages,
I'm mixing. Okay.
That's a good plan, though.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, they are not one of the groups that normally shows up to this meeting?
No, they're one of...
They are. Okay, sorry.
This is one of Salem's closer diplomatic, existing closer diplomatic alliances. Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, they normally show up at the town hall anyway, so that's where we should meet them. Or All Hallows Hall.
So the diplomatic emissary from the Guardianship of the Quabbin Horror is Julissa Rosensweig. She is a tall, broad-shouldered woman, probably somewhere in her mid to late 50s. She has longish, sandy blonde hair, which is going gray. She dresses in like a kind of clothing you'd wear if you worked day in, day out on a construction site, like Carhartts and probably a flannel shirt this time of year. It's not quite warm enough yet for short sleeves, and work boots. And she has a pair of crazy looking goggles on her head. She's not putting them over her eyes. She's got them up on her forehead. And her right hand has this big geared metal glove with wires and like sort of cathode ray tube type things sticking off of it a couple of different places, goes all the way up her forearm. She arrives at the office and is very, relatively at least, personable and warm. She's understands that there's some ambiguity in the structure of authority in Salem right now, but you're who I'm here to see as I understand it.
Yes. There is a tray of snacks out on the desk also. So partly related to that is that, in other circumstances, we might have considered maybe putting off some meetings, moving things around until things were more settled here. But there's kind of a significant problem that maybe you're already aware of coming out of Hartford.
Yes. I think he used to be your problem, and now it seems like he's everybody's problem.
Yeah.
She reaches out to the tray of snacks. I'm going to say she goes for like an ants on a log situation, like
nice
celery and peanut butter and raisins. She reaches out with the gloved hand, and there's a faint whirring noise as the motors inside it carefully, delicately pick up the fragile snack, and she eats it.
Yeah, so we're trying to talk to everyone and get on the same page about not letting that expansion keep happening. Based on our initial looking into things, Mercurius is kind of a big shit, and he's already moved up towards Springfield.
I'd heard rumors, but I wasn't sure. Well, it's very troubling if he's expanding. Obviously, raises concerns for those of us in his pathway. Are you open to some sort of mutual defense agreement?
Extremely open, yes.
Well, I don't have authority to just make that agreement now, nor do you, if I understand correctly. The whole citizenry would need to vote. That's the way you do things here, right?
Yes. She glances around at you and Coach specifically.
For certain arrangements, yes.
But we are trying to get everyone sort of on the same page so that when the time comes, we can tie it up. And if things start going bad before the time comes, we can
be on the right foot.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what we're looking for, is to be on the right foot. We look at all these people who are kind of in between us, like he's not really threatening us directly, but we can see where this all might end up, right? If we make friends and make sure that we all protect each other, maybe we can, keep those borders where they're supposed to be.
Well, I know that the Concilium's highest goal is always to keep what is asleep. So if Mercurius poses a threat to our guest under the lake, then I'm confident that they would be pleased to agree to a pact of mutual defense.
Cool. Yeah, that sort of overrode a lot of the other docket items that we might have for this kind of meeting. Is there anything you think we should know about your situation right now?
Things proceed The sleeper continues to sleep. We're happy to report no rest of activity since last we spoke to the good people of Salem. We are fulfilling our responsibility to the whole of the world.
And we are most grateful for it.
So I presume then that when we attend your next conclave as diplomatic guests, the sometimes uncomfortable matter of the annual pledge of support won't be an issue this year.
What now?
She, well, I understand that you are sort of together acting as the mayor of Salem, yes? It's been the long-standing practice between our two communities that in light of the fact that we devote ourselves to ensuring that a creature of near-infinite power from before the existence of the universe does not rampage across the countryside and breathe all of us out of existence, that Salem, in its infinite wisdom, will lend certain material supports to the Guardianship in order to allow us to continue to do our important work.
8-Ball nods, but is also looking at Mew like...
Is this something we would know about from previous meetings?
No. Those of you who've been to conclave meetings before, like I know some of you pay more or less attention to the political goings-on in Salem, but no, this is not something that you're aware of being formally agreed to by the people of Salem.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, Mew's eyes narrow, but he says, of course, as a community of peace, we will do what is necessary.
Very good.
Mother McCree is sitting like in a perch, basically in the office, and jumps down and goes over to the side of her and just says, "But if you could, dearie, could you show us where in writing that agreement is? We can't seem to find it in the office."
Julissa stiffens slightly and holds out that gauntlet hand, palm up, fingers splayed, and a little image appears in there. It's formed by static electricity sparking from each of the 5 fingers of the hand into the middle over the palm, and together the lattice creates something like it'd be like a black and white version of a hologram carved out of electricity, right? Like there's no color saturation because it's just sparks, basically. But the image is certainly recognizable to Jack, because there are definitely 1 or 2 paintings of your grandfather in the Foxglove family home, right? So I don't think that Jack would necessarily have a great mental image of his grandfather from this period. And no, he wouldn't have great. It's his grandfather from younger than he was before Jack was born. But certainly he's seen images of his grandfather that match roughly with this time. And the face says, in a voice somewhat familiar to Jack, wasn't very close to his grandfather, but he recognizes his voice. I, Archibald Foxglove, Mayor of Salem, protector of its citizenry, do promise to the guardianship of the Quabbin Horror our ongoing support in their noble mission of protection. She closes her fist again.
But that doesn't talk about the material support?
She closes the fist, so the image stops, but she says, I guess the list didn't get passed off to you from Mayor Espinoza.
Yeah, that's the thing that we would want to look at real quick.
I'm sure we can produce a copy of it. I'll send it along by carrier spirit.
Okay.
I didn't realize you would need one.
Yeah, neither did we.
You have to realize that the handoff wasn't exactly clean, but we'll get caught up on it, and we'll have a chat about it, right? It'll be a fair and honest and open chat, and we can go from there, right?
Yeah, like I'm sure it's fine, but knowing how things are with us type people, you can never presume that any list is not going to contain something that is off the fucking wall. So I am probably never going to say yes to a list I can't see. And I doubt you would either. But that's like,
I can appreciate it. She sort of sits back. Yes. Well, I assure you it's nothing.
Yeah.
Well, you'll see.
Presume we're good unless something totally bizarre happens.
In any event, I understand things are a bit up in the air here. I get it. But we'll provide the list with more than enough time for you to compile all of the elements of it before Beltane.
Great. Thank you.
And certainly anything in the name of keeping the peace must be a good thing.
Not even keeping the peace, right? But maintaining really deep and lasting friendships. That's what we should be going for.
Yes, those.
Deep and lasting friendships. I like that very much. We've always been good friends with the Salemites, and the Salemites have been good friends to us, long supporters in our important work. So I'll be very pleased to bring your proposal of a pact of mutual defense to the Concilium.
Also, watch your southern borders.
Yeah. Feel free to call us with anything that crops up down there. We might not have the ability to get manpower out there quickly, but we've done a fairly significant amount of homework, so we can at least try to identify what's what.
Very good.
Quick sidebar. Do we want to, if we're feeling pretty comfortable with Julissa, do we want to let her know a little bit of what we know? About the hybrids? The, vampire werewolves?
There's just one, I think,
that we know of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might bring that up, actually, yeah. One thing maybe we should put on that table immediately is that one of Becurius's proxies in Springfield appears to be what is known in our vernacular, at least, as an abomination.
Yeah, we call it an abomination too.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that?
Julissa, her eyes go wide at that, and he made one of those? I thought that
was the same face I made.
Yeah.
You all didn't do that.
I'm not sure if he made one or found one. And no, we don't.
Well, you shouldn't have any trouble finding common enemies, or she does the math in her head, enemies of your enemy to be your friends if he's making abominations. Well, practically signed his own death warrant there, didn't he?
Yeah, but it seems like he's done that a few times and he's still kicking, so...
Well, I will also convey this to the Concilium. I'm sure that they'll be interested and concerned.
Well, we appreciate your time and your continued support, and you have ours.
Thank you quite a bit. She goes around the room and shakes hands, or paws in Mew's case, with each of you, and Mother McCree is last. Says, Mother McCree.
She doesn't shake her hand, she just nods.
Julissa looks down at the outstretched hand that isn't being shaken and smacks her teeth slightly and nods, doesn't say anything, and leaves.
Did Julissa shake with the gloved hand?
The gloved hand, yes.
Okay.
Which has an extremely firm, but it didn't crush anybody's hand, right? It's not aggressive in that sense. It's just boy, you're really shaking hands with a metal hand.
Mm-hmm.
As she leaves, or when she leaves, Mother McCree just kind of mumbles to herself, and she's like, "The people you have to deal with in this profession, and then the people you have to proceed, coming right after these deal makers who hide behind shadows and claim that you have to have votes for things and then don't have votes for things.
Mother McCree, I hate to pull a Mother McCree on you, but next time that we're talking to and trying to establish diplomatic relationships with somebody else, you should shake their damn hand.
Sonny, the day I be lectured by likes of you about courtesy hasn't come yet and won't come anytime soon.
I'm just saying, if we want to make sure that these relationships hold, and trust me, I know about relationships, you got to make nice.
Well, it sounds like it doesn't matter. She's just going to take it to a council, and apparently we got to have a vote to see if we're going to help them if they get attacked by a horde of abominations. But apparently we don't have to have a vote if we're going to give people raw resources without any knowledge of what they are or why we're giving it to them.
Sometimes when you want to take down a really, really big elephant, you need the whole pack to work together. And that's what we're trying to do.
The pack working together.
You can't do everything on your own.
Was your grandfather working together with the pack when he made deals without communicating with the community? Was your grandfather and your uncle working with the pack when he was allying himself with pieces of paper held by monsters?
I think that's exactly what he was doing.
He's got a funny way of showing it.
Have you killed an elephant?
Definitely a solid.
At this point, though, Mother McCree is actually going to... We're in the office, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She's going to start going through filing cabinets.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just... this is getting out of hand. Everyone we meet with is going to tell us that there's a backroom deal with the previous mayors, and she's going to suggest that before we meet with anyone, we pull all of the documentation that this office has about it, because we don't want to get blindsided again with deals that we're supposed to be making that are assumed and we don't know about.
Yeah, I think we should refrain from ever saying yes to any of those.
Yeah.
Well, now we're on the same page, Jack.
Okay, so research interlude.
Can we at least start with this one that we just discussed? Is it anywhere in this office?
So, it takes a little while to go through the files. System's not necessarily intuitive, and we all weren't set up with it in advance. But there is, the ghost butler of the mayor's office to help you to some degree.
Call? Ghost butler.
And in fact, once you dig through it, you know what you're looking for. You can find a record that Archibald did make a agreement under his auspices as mayor that he did not seek to get ratified by the conclave, but the initial document does also have it has a signature from the then current master of the crook and the chief justice of the abnormal courts. Like it wasn't formally ratified as a treaty in the way that you would have to do if you were going to make a formal treaty. But it was an agreement that was clearly signed off on by a number of notable leaders in Salem. And it has a copy of the list of what they expect, right? So now you don't actually have to wait for Julissa to send that courier message over to you. You got the original agreement right here. And
we don't have to take her word exclusively for it.
Yes, true.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, you've got a record of what was made. You can use magic to verify it pretty easily. It's definitely legitimately an agreement from 70-ish years ago. Yes. And so the expectation is for trying to get the numbers right here, for 26 standard vials of Quintessence.
Is that a lot?
We'll get to that in a second. But 26 standard vials of Quintessence, 77 pounds of platinum, and 13 ghosts per annum.
Platinum is a lot.
It is a lot. Assuming that you don't have access to an alchemist, then it's sort of
moot.
13 ghosts?
13 ghosts.
It's supposed to trap them in like a glass house or something with clockwork walls, or
and then remake it like 30 years really badly.
Hey, sorry. We probably have 4 XP sitting around at this point, right? Or at least I do, I think, because I haven't spent any well.
Yeah, everybody's got a bunch of XP. If you haven't spent any, you've got probably like 8 or 9 at this point.
Great. In that case, I'm buying a point of Auspex and the Quick Insight merit so I can read extremely fast.
Sure.
cool.
Definitely useful for many of the things that 8-Ball does.
Yeah, that's a thing that 8-Ball has been sort of practicing recently, like since all this started to go down. And so, yeah, when we get into this process, she's just like grabbing a drawer and just shuffling through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if the file on this, meticulous records have been kept because this is a agreement that has been maintained over the decades. And so there's, paperwork here from every previous mayor of Salem saying, I delivered this on such and such a date. This is which of the known alchemists in Salem I approached to produce the platinum necessary to fulfill this requirement. This is how I gathered the Quintessence, which is it's a mage-specific term for raw mystical energy.
Right.
It's 26 files is a bunch to deliver all at once, but it's a pretty nominal amount when you have several different mystical confluences just in the city of Salem itself, and an entire year in which to stock it up. Like it's actually a pretty small value overall.
As someone who's been leading the coven for a very long time, have they come to me for it, or like without telling me, or like where? I mean, they're not getting it from. Are they getting it from the coven, or are they getting it from? I mean, there are other mages in the area.
Yeah. So this agreement only went into force. It started with Archibald, right? And Archibald was the mayor from 1950 to 1957. How active around town has Mother McCree been since that time? Since the 50s.
Not very, but she is. By then, she was the leader of the coven.
Sure.
So she had lots of go-betweens, and yes, she was not super involved.
Mm-hmm.
But if a request from the mayor's office to acquire Quintessence came through the coven, it would have crossed her proverbial desk.
Right. So
whether she had to sign off on it or not, which she probably has already left agreements to do whatever they tell you to do.
So, like, let's say someone, I guess I've been proceeding under the assumption that 1 vial of Quintessence, which is not a lot, right? That's less than a week's worth of the spiritual resource value of the Bitter Well.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, she's been the nominal leader, she's been the technical leader of the coven, and certainly all the other members of the coven defer to her. I've been assuming that she didn't act as the warden of the Bitter Well during that time, right? She wasn't like attending meetings and stuff.
No. And everyone else is totally allowed to make those decisions.
Right.
It's just kind of a courtesy that within extreme cases, like a request from the mayor's office, it would probably be told to her. That's the extent of it.
Yeah. So it probably would have reached her, but it's like really, it's so small that I don't think that she would have cared.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I'm just saying did that also did at least some of it, or if not all of it, come from the coven? Your answer is yes, or at least some of it.
And more specifically, Mew, who's a current warden, can say, yeah, I've passed over, like I've allowed people from the mayor's office to come and withdraw a small amount of the spiritual power of Harmony Grove from there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what the obelisk over on the West Hill is for.
Right. It's basically just a small piece of essentially the tax system of Salem. There isn't exactly an official tax system on individuals, but there is sort of a tax on the loci, the spiritual resources of Salem. And this is like, you can pay these 26 vials out of that tax base and still have a bunch left over. Sure. Like it's not even most of what the...
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that the ghosts are the tricky part of this equation.
Yep, that's what I was gonna ask about.
Yeah, and I imagine Mew has some thoughts on that one.
So now Mew has some direct responsibility for the ghosts who specifically frequent Harmony Grove, and I think a certain greater paternalistic sense of responsibility for the ghosts of Greater Salem in general. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And it, 13 per year, that's a lot of ghosts overall. And Mew hasn't necessarily been fully awake and active the entire stretch of this, but a big chunk of it he has been. Now, most of the time, he's protective about the ghosts that reside in and around Salem. And occasionally he has to police them. And very occasionally, we're talking probably not more than a couple times per year, he has to like stop them from doing really bad stuff. And when that happens, it's standard procedure established since probably going back to before he was actively serving as warden of Harmony Grove, that he turns them over to the good shepherds probably, or to essentially they pass out of his hands. Like he's not responsive. Like he doesn't operate his own ghost jail is I guess what I'm getting at. Right.
So yeah, that he is capable of eating ghosts and sort of filing away their noumena to gift to other ghosts if he chooses. To go along with this, I'll say that yes, usually he will restrain and turn them over, but occasionally, if one is being excessively unrestful, he'll have to eat it in the heat of the moment.
Certainly, no one's ever leaned on him to like go rustle up some ghosts for us. I mean, he can't think of any time when that's happened. He has certainly. I mean, in fact, there's probably documentation on who each of the 13 ghosts were each year. I mean, that's the kind of level of detailed record you're dealing with. So you could sift through this and see, oh, right, that's somebody like he was really bothering that nice, respectful family 2 blocks over. So I rounded him up and gave him over to the shepherds, and I guess he ended up getting shuffled off to the Quabbin. But in addition to that, Jack, you can remember once you're looking over these documents and sort of thinking, in the course of Jack's lifetime, he's hunted ghosts many times as a junior member of packs in previous years, and he's led hunts against ghosts before. He's done it with his uncle more than once. And what happens when you hunt down a spirit varies, right? Sometimes, I mean, if it's like a really nasty spirit, you're hunting it down to try and destroy it. Sometimes you're hunting it down and you get a boon from it, like it teaches you some new lesson.
Yeah, it's like a sport. Yeah,
right. And sometimes it's sort of more sporting. Sometimes it's like a capture thing, and you can think of a bunch of times you've hunted ghosts for capture with your uncle or with a member of your uncle's pack. Didn't really have any reason to think about like what happens to this ghost afterwards. It's just some lesser spirit, basically. Remember, ghosts don't have citizenship in Salem, so there's no particular restrictions on what you can and can't do to them.
Yet.
So it's accountable, basically. There's also probably evidence when you dig through the documentation. They've done some horse trading, like I'll trade you this favor or this valuable good for literally like a couple of ghosts encased in amber, right? Like just in order to fulfill the agreement, they've supplied literally hundreds of ghosts over the years.
Are there any other
8-Ball?
I was just about to ask 8-Ball. Are there any other deals like this to other jurisdictions?
No.
Okay.
Nothing. No sort of like this is a one-sided in the sense that Salem doesn't get anything direct in exchange for it. Transfer of goods from Salem to another community. There is nothing like that in the records.
Was Espinoza like the one who stopped this? Like, was that the last time when it was delivered, or when did the records stop?
The records don't stop. No, Julissa was alluding to the idea that there have been times when there have been different administrations that maybe like made some noise about whether they would fulfill it or not.
Okay.
But it's been ongoing. Okay. Yeah, no, she was just trying to make sure that
it keeps going.
It's just got to be re-upped every time.
I was under the impression that at some point it had stopped and she wanted it to come start over again. Okay.
Do the numbers change at all?
Nope, they have not. Been static since the first agreement was made.
8-Ball sort of nods along through that entire ghost conversation and just says, huh, you learn something new and absolutely horrifying every day. And then she texts Julissa and she's like, found list, all probably fine.
Yeah, from the standpoint of the resources of the mayor's office of Salem, this is not a hard thing to fulfill. It's not like onerous.
And it's status quo.
Yeah, it requires a certain amount of work from the mayor and the mayor's agents, but it's not like testing. It's not a particular burden.
That being said, though, in order to do this, I mean, Jack implied that he probably was involved in it. In order to do this, how many people did they have to let into the idea that this agreement exists? I mean, how much were they trying to hide that they had made this agreement?
Interesting question.
We could probably ask the ghost butler about that. Like, who knew about this?
Yeah, why isn't this on the table?
I can ask Fenton if you want. He'd probably know.
Oh, yeah.
So the Ghostbusters is in the room, and he can say, "Look, certainly I knew about it, and you can see that all the previous mayors knew about it. All the previous and current masters of the crook, the chief justice of the abnormal courts,
Some of whom were previous mayors anyway.
and the clerk of the court would know. You can see her signature on a couple of different documents."
I guess my question is this secret? Is it?
It's in a gray area, right? The mayor has, for the Constitution of Salem, mayor has authority and responsibility for the security of Salem and to make the arrangements that are necessary for that. If it had anything to do, like if it involved seizing property or in any way affecting the rights, freedom, or person of a citizen, there's no question it would be way beyond the mayor's scope of responsibility. But it's not, because ghosts aren't citizens. So from that perspective, I think it's at least within a fair reading of the city constitution. Maybe not necessarily the maximal reading, but within a fair reading of it, that no one was ever responsible for telling anybody else that this was going on.
Okay.
But I don't think it was like Fight Club. I don't get the impression that this was like Fight Club, where like you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. It's just one of those things, right? I'm sure there's other agreements that are similar to this that no one really needs to know. Nobody really talks about it because it doesn't really impact anything. So,
right. I mean, if Jack thinks back on it enough, he can definitely think of Fenton saying like, yeah, the mayor asked me a favor to bring him a ghost prisoner, so I'm going to take this ghost who's a total jerk to the mayor, right? Like it hasn't been carefully hidden. It just hasn't mattered much.
Oh, everything's Fight Club with you, isn't it, Jack?
it's a good movie.
Yeah, except the first rule of Fight Club is you never stop talking about Fight Club.
But meanwhile, I am real curious if there's any more deals like this.
I'll keep an eye out.
Not necessarily trades, but how many backroom deals are the mayor's making? We already know of 2 now, and I'm uncomfortable with the first, and I'm more or less fine with the second, but...
Well, speak for yourself.
To be clear, a ghost is a pretty common supernatural ingredient. From ingredient. From a magi point of view, it's not like everybody's constantly trading in ghosts, but it's also pretty conventional. They're the most readily available spiritual being because the world is constantly making them, unlike the nature spirits and the fae.
Right.
So,
but from a humanistic standpoint, it's still mildly horrific.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not trying to downplay it, like, from my sense of personal ethics. But I'm not a vampire, werewolf, or wizard. So,
yeah,
my system of ethics is a little bit different from theirs.
Commonplace, but terrible.
Yeah, for Jack's perspective, this is just whatever. Like, this is what we do on a Saturday night. Like, it's literally how werewolves get their essence back.
Right.
Now, ghosts have varying levels of autonomy, but they do all have a sense of self.
Yeah, 8-Ball is filing this away under things to not think about right now, but we'll probably have to think about later.
This is front burner from you.
I just mean the ethical part of it. Are we ready for our next meeting?
Sure.
That's it this week for The Chimera. Our theme music this season is Down Among the Dead Men, performed by Adrienne Howard, Emily Peterson, and Dirk I. Tiede. For information on other music used in this episode, check the show notes. You can support The Chimera by going to patreon.com/chimerapod. Patrons at any amount get access to behind-the-scenes setting and system info, art polls, and exclusive side games and one-shots. You can also find us online at thechimera.space or on Twitter and Facebook at ChimeraPod. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, so until then, thanks for listening.
Not recording anymore.